Welcome to the Remarkable Rodents webinar. To begin, look at this collage of animals and decide which one of these are rodents. Squirrel, rabbit, vole, chipmunk, shrew, and beaver are your choices. Are they all rodents? Are some not in the club? Believe it or not, we are going to look at their teeth to make the determination. All right, so let's look at these three skulls, and you can see that there is one that really stands out as different. Can you see that one in the left upper corner? It's very, very different. And so I'm noticing that it has sharp teeth. When I think of sharp teeth, I think of carnivores. So here is the shrew skull. Very sharp teeth that's quite different from the other two skulls. And Bert also mentioned, my husband said that it looks like he's been chewing tobacco. He's got dark stained teeth. And you can see it's a tiny little skull, actually. A shrew is only 3 to 4 inches long. So if you're a carnivore and you're that small, you're going to be eating insects and earthworms and other things that are small like that. It's actually in a group called insectivores, along with the moles. So they are not rodents. Now let's go to this picture. These skulls have a lot of similarities. Can you type in the chat some similarities that you notice between these two?
Okay, friends, so looking at both of these skulls, what do you notice that is similar about them? Kathy just shared large orbits. Now the orbits are the where the eyeballs would fit in. Okay, Bert over in Bell Links just shared big gap in the teeth. Anybody else? Oh, okay, Rebecca shares large front teeth. Also, Melissa shares large front teeth. Kim, back to you.
Okay, well, those of you who noticed that big space between the large front teeth, and that's both the top and the bottom are very large, aren't they? Those are the incisors, which relate to our front teeth. Notice there's no canines. That shrew had those sharp teeth that went all the way along, and those ones are right behind the front teeth are the canines. These guys don't have them, which is a really good clue that these are not going to be carnivores. The back teeth are called the cheek teeth, and they are similar to our molars and premolars that we chew with. So these skulls are very similar in that they have those features, but there is one difference, and we're going to have to turn them over to see that. Notice the white arrow is pointing to a second pair of teeth directly behind the front incisors of the rabbit. And so only rabbits and their relatives have these two pairs of front teeth. And they're really unusual, and they're able to slice through vegetation with an angled tooth like that. The rodent on the right does not have that. And so any animal that has that kind of skull is a rodent. Let's look closer. These front incisors of the rodent curve all the way back. Look at that blue line trying to show how they come back into the skull. A visitor brought this skull in, and we were able to see the tooth goes all the way back to the top of those cheek teeth. So it is a huge tooth, and they grow constantly. So the key factor of a rodent is that it has ever-growing teeth. And it's important that they use these teeth because they do keep growing. A squirrel's tooth grows 8 inches a year. So if you have a 4 or 5 year old squirrel, it's grown almost 4 feet of teeth in its lifetime. So they have to know. And so it's a good thing that they can use those teeth to get into nuts and acorns and things. So it's so important because if your teeth are misaligned, you're not going to be able to feed properly. And this has a happy ending, I promise. A person saw this squirrel out in their yard and took pity on it and caught it and read on the internet how to help it. And so I think she used some kind of clippers and then ground it down to the right length. And she says it's now happily feeding around her yard. In the wild, you might find bones in the woods that have been gnawed on by mice and other rodents. And now you kind of have a sense of why they are gnawing on hard things. If they're gnawing on a bone, they're also getting calcium and other minerals, which are really cool. If they're gnawing on an old plastic axe handle, which some of the naturalists found recently, then they're hopefully not ingesting that, but just working on their teeth. Okay, let's look at this diverse group of animals and realize that rodents are the largest mammal group on the planet. They have more species and more individuals. So they include the hamster and prairie dog. The largest one on the right is the capybara, and then the porcupine and the red squirrel found in the Appalachians, and then the mole rat. All of these, the naked mole rat, are rodents and very, very diverse. They have been in the world for at least 56 million years. I've found references to 160 million-year-old flying squirrels, but only 56 million in other sources. So a very long time when you consider we have been here less than 1 million years. They're found in every habitat from the tropics to the Arctic to deserts to temperate forests. And speaking of the Arctic, let's talk about this little guy. I had the pleasure of going to Alaska a few years ago, and this Arctic squirrel was busy feeding, voraciously feeding. And it turns out he only gets to eat 4 months a year. The other 8 months of the year, he is burrowed in his nest asleep. And they have found that he can survive the lowest temperatures of any mammal known on the planet. His burrow will plunge to 0 degrees. It's in the permafrost, and his body temperature can plunge to -2 degrees. But he has this really unique adaptation of about every 2 weeks, he starts to shiver. He never wakes up, but he or she shivers until the body temperature is normal again. And then it rests, and then it shivers. And it does this about 8 to 10 times throughout that 8 months. And it survives that way. It's there, and they've studied it. They know that it's not antifreeze in the blood, so it's this unique adaptation. But here in Tennessee, we don't have Arctic squirrels, but we have plenty of squirrels. And these are the 3 groups out of the 27 families of rodents that are found in the world that we have here in Tennessee that are native. We're going to look first at this group, and I would love the squirrel group. Would you type in the chat what you've observed at bird feeders about how these 2 feed? Are they the same or are they different? Tell me about some of your observations.
Okay, friends, share your observations in the chat about how these 2 animals feed at your bird feeders. Anybody have something to share, something that you've watched at your bird feeders? Okay, I've got something here from Rachel in the Fork, and she is sharing that she notices that one feeds on the ground. Okay, and we've got Rebecca over in Franklin. Chipmunks fill their cheeks with seeds and then run away. Bert over in Bell Link says chipmunks seem to only eat off the ground. Very interesting. Oh, Melissa over in I don't even know what to say. She lives over there. The chipmunks tend to stay on the ground and the squirrels get on the feeders.
All right.
That's kind of interesting. All right, back to you, Kim.
Excellent observations. And as we go through each animal, we're going to learn more about how they feed. Let's start off with one of my favorite rodents, and hopefully yours too. His Latin name literally means striped hoarder. So he hoards his nuts and he's striped, as this next picture will show us. He is great for camouflage as he runs through the forest, collecting seeds. And this is a chipmunk, by the way. When he's at a feeding station, it is like watching a vacuum just cover the top of the stump as he fills his cheek pouches. And the cheek pouches can take up to 100 seeds, and we'll find out about their nut intake in a minute. They'll take things as big as a peanut and stick it in there. And by the way, some of these pictures are from the internet if there's no credit on there. So I took this picture in my backyard just the other day, a brand new hole near my feeding station. And it was about 2 inches wide. So a lot of people come in and say, who built this hole? Or when we're taking kids on field trips, they want to know that. Well, if you take a little measuring tool with you, you can determine if it's about 2 inches wide, then most likely it is a chipmunk. Now that hole leads down to this amazing design of a burrow. It has, I love it that they call plunge holes. How many times have you witnessed a squirrel just disappear from view? And it was plunging into one of his escape routes. So they, in the bottom of that, they'll have little sections for nuts. They have their sleeping nest and they have runs. And I love it that they even include drainage tunnels. They are smart little guys who are very well adapted to living in the ground. So unfortunately, if you keep all your nuts in one place, you sometimes have to fight, think about. Keep your store all your food safe. There are other rogue chipmunks out there who think, hey, I think I'll just go take your nuts. Animal we were looking at. And I'm going to start do it all over their territory. So imagine over 1 acre or so, they've got nuts hidden everywhere. Bobcats, lynx. And then they've got the problem of, well, gosh, you've got to find all those nuts. Because it seems like every piece of ground looks the same to me, but they've got to figure out something. And it turns out through studies they've discovered that the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain where everybody has memory, does nutty things, that increases in a squirrel. But anyway, she's a great introduction. So when they need to have a mental map of their seeds and nuts that are stashed, their brain literally grows. Literally means, and then in the spring it goes back down to regular size. So some other strategies they have is they will bite the acorn so that it won't germinate like when they bury it, because they don't. But in the winter, this not germinate. Beautiful fluffy tail. So that's one cool idea. They've also discovered, and just a few pictures from the internet shows their different types of nuts in different areas of their territory. So they'll have an acorn section and a walnut section. Great. So when they go to get their nut, they actually know which kind of nut they're going to get. I don't speak squirrel, but each one squirrels do, and they recognize agitation. So they may have, so they are able to communicate. Biological response. Another adaptation these guys have is their leg muscles. The back leg muscles are huge in comparison to a ground scatter, and obviously they need these muscles so they can leap from tree to tree. They have 2 different types of nests. So when they are at a feeder, unlike the chipmunk breeding feels pouches and then takes them somewhere else, in the spring they just feed. They feed voraciously. They might be born and until you run them off, they will take over the bird. That would be cool. They're often taking over with. But when it comes to acorns and other nuts, they have a different strategy. Build a nest in the fall. They are busy. They're going to be active all winter. Just thinks they're kind of messy, but the nuts aren't going to always be there. If you were to really look at this nest, you would discover it has. When they cache a nut, they bury it about an inch below the surface, a stabilization all around it, and then they stuff it with leaves. So birds don't do that. They don't use leaves like this, and they wouldn't have a big messy nest. This is a new word for you, dray. If you see a nest like this, it's also called a dray for squirrels. Okay, when those young are born, and they about 6 weeks, they'll start coming out of the tree, but they spend their first few weeks learning how to navigate arboreal living. That means living in trees. And so these squirrels, you'll see them up there chasing each other and jumping on branches. And eventually, after a couple of months, they will go off on their own. I wanted to share one of my favorite experiences with a squirrel. I was frog logging with my husband, and that means we were out listening to the songs of frogs in the spring, and I heard a splash in a willow pond right off Highway 100. And we put our lights on it, and it was a little baby gray squirrel, and it made a beeline for us. And it climbed up my legs before I could even blink and just perched on my shoulder. So we looked for its nest. We couldn't find anything. We didn't hear any sounds. It was night. So I took it home. And the next day we went back, still couldn't find the nest. And it ended up going to Walden's Puddle, where I trust it is living happily ever after. But that was a sweet encounter. Now, why am I showing you a picture of a snake with a bow? Because we had squirrels. Sometimes squirrels get in your attic or eaves and they chew, and they're a problem. And so we decided to put a rubber rattlesnake on our roof when we had that happen. And within days, our squirrels were gone. This one just happens to be dressed for the holidays, and I didn't have another picture. But it's also fun. You get all sorts of frantic knocks on your door and phone calls from people insisting you got a venomous snake on your roof. So I recommend that if you have problems. Then there's another squirrel in town, although most people don't even know it's here. It's not as common. It's a fox squirrel, and they're the largest tree squirrel. You can see why they might be called fox squirrels, because they have this beautiful fox-colored coat blended in, and particularly on the edge of their tail. But they have similar behaviors as a gray squirrel. Now, another squirrel that many people will go their lifetime without even seeing this squirrel. You might find evidence by finding these nuts. These nuts, notice how they've been chewed very precisely and one side open and the nut retrieved. That's not how squirrels eat nuts, or gray squirrels. This was chewed by a flying squirrel. So here's 3 little flying squirrels peeking out of a cavity in a tree. This is where they spend the daytime. They come out at night. And here's our first 2 clues that they come out at night. Look at that giant eye, way bigger in its face than the other squirrels. And then it's got those huge ears. So they've got keen sense of hearing and really good nocturnal vision for nighttime living. Got to look at this interesting fold of skin on its body. When they come out at night, it's safer up in the treetops, right? They are going to launch from the tree, push off, and then open their arms, and this beautiful fold of skin that goes from the top legs, feet to the bottom is going to open up like a parachute and help them fly. They're actually gliding, but it looks like they're flying. Some more terms here, the patagium for 1 or patagia for 2 is what they call this unusual flap of skin that connects the feet. And then notice this cartilage on the right. And that cartilage is literally used like an airplane. Notice how airplanes often have something that sticks up. It helps them navigate when they're gliding. So these guys can reach up to 20 miles per hour. Can you imagine if you hit a tree going 20 miles per hour? Well, they actually will align themselves so that their tail is, they basically get vertical and their tail is straight down, and they make sure they land on all 4 feet at the same time. And this helps them. They also, that cartilage can slow them down as they approach. And this kind of distributes the stress of hitting the tree. And then they immediately run to the other side of the tree before they do anything else in case a predator is following them. So really interesting guys. All right, 2 years ago, somebody was outside with a UV light and probably looking at lichen because they glow under UV light. And he said, a pink squirrel flew by. And he started telling people, and they're like, you're crazy. Well, once the word got out, they started checking, and it turns out that under UV light, the flying squirrel will fluoresce pink. They still don't know why. They are trying to guess, is it mating behavior? Does it actually confuse owls? But either way, it's exciting to know that you could still discover something today about a species that we've known has been around for years. It just gets my naturalist and biologist mindset going to think of the possibilities. I want to share a few encounters we've had with the flying squirrel. I was in a group doing a biodiversity survey at the Hill Forest, and we were in the middle of the day, and we came upon this flying squirrel low, almost to the ground. It turns out they do forage on the ground, by the way. They don't always just stay high up in the trees. They love to eat fungi and lichen and nuts and other things. So even baby birds and bird eggs sometimes. So occasionally you'll find them on the ground, but it's rare to find them during the day on the ground. So we got to watch this guy rapidly climb up the tree as soon as he was spotted. And then one of our bird banders, bluebird box checkers, Sandy Bivens, found this flying squirrel who ran out of the box when she approached. And inside was a little hoard of nuts. So that was fun. And Diana McCluskey, another bird bander, found one inside her box. So fun little flying squirrels, but hard to find them. Okay, so now would you put in the chat what you called this animal?
This animal has so many different names, and it might be kind of something that's local. Oh, okay, we just heard from Melissa. She says groundhog. Kathy says groundhog. Ann says groundhog. Bert says woodchuck. Anybody else want to contribute a name for this animal? Okay, Kim, back to you.
Okay, Heather, I'm disappointed you didn't say whistle pig. because that's another name that people call this animal. The young are called chucklings, which refers to the woodchuck. And who doesn't know how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? I'll race you some other time, guys. But anyway, this animal has a lot of different names, but oddly enough, when school children come to the mammal case at the Nature Center, I would say the majority of them cannot name this animal. And yet we all know it has a national holiday. We'll get to that in just a minute. But I like to call this a groundhog because it is an animal that lives in the ground, and it's pretty porky. It turns out they love flowers and grasses, and particularly your vegetables. They love your vegetables. And so they hibernate. I don't know if any of you saw the blog this week, but I talked about how they're the only true hibernators here in Tennessee, because they are hibernating to sleep away a time of food scarcity. It's not because it's cold so much as their food isn't present. So that is why they hibernate. They can be found in any kind of open area. And my sister, they also, as I mentioned, love gardens. My sisters have an amazing yard. It is a true wildlife habitat. And she sent me some of these videos that I'm going to share, the next two. This one shows their behavior when they're frightened. Look at how it stands up. It can balance perfectly on its back feet and search for danger when it gets frightened. All right, and this next one, I got a pretty excited text from them saying, did you know the groundhogs could climb? And it's something people don't realize because they're called groundhogs and we always see them on the ground, but yes, they can climb. So they climb her fence and they're eating flowers of a little tree. You can see they have lots of food in this yard. So this is a groundhog's paradise. And their opening is much bigger. They're much bigger animals. So 10 to 12 inches wide is how big the opening is. And like chipmunks, they always have an exit hole. And you can imagine if you're underground and a rattlesnake decides to visit, you want to get out. So you always, if you live underground, you want to have several ways to get in and out. And of course, they're famous for coming up in the spring, checking things out. And supposedly, if their shadow shows that winter continues, and if it doesn't, spring is almost there. Here's a picture of Punxsutawney Phil and his handler. Did you know he had a handler? That was literally taken from a newspaper article. And in Pennsylvania, I think it's the Pennsylvania Dutch that started this tradition. It's a big ceremony, and they're very proud of it, and they claim 75 to 90% accuracy. Well, someone actually did the results and it's more like 39%, but let's let them be proud anyway. It's kind of a fun tradition that we welcome on February 2nd as a diversion. So the groundhog is our last squirrel, and we're going to move on to the mice. Now, the first one we're going to talk about, you might not even know exists. This is a meadow vole. And it lives among the leaf litter and in the wildflowers, and it's always really low down, living there. And I took this at the Nature Center in 2012. The next time I saw a vole at work was last winter when this guy started coming out and feeding from the seed platforms. Now, the defining characteristic of the vole is notice this little teeny tail. So unlike a mouse, it doesn't have a long tail. It's also a more rounded, elongate member of the mouse family. And here it is eating, completely oblivious to the sparrow, the white-throated sparrow above. We have them at our house about 3 months ago when I found my dog had cornered this little guy. And it's a little vole that luckily got away in time. When Melissa Donahue and I went for a walk on the Birch Reserve, and as we entered this tunnel, I saw a rat at the end. And I noticed it had a long tail. And it ran out quickly, and we followed it, and it kind of hid in the grasses and looked down, and I took this picture, which is not great, but you can see the nose is pointing to the left. And if you try hard, you might see the eye just above one of the leaves sticking up. But this is a hispid cotton rat. And hispid refers to the stiff hairs that cover the body. Notice it has a totally different color than than other rats. So hispid cotton rat. This was super exciting because we knew that they should be there, but we've never actually seen one in the park. So now it is a resident of our mammal species list. And there should be more out there that we can discover. I'll show you one in a minute. These guys will make runs in the tall grasses. If you work hard, you can see a little curving trail here that's been matted down. They can be hard to see because the grasses fold over and make it hard to see. All right, let's move on to the more traditional mice, the ones we think of when we hear that word. And this is a white-footed mouse. He's omnivorous. He'll eat just about anything he can get his teeth into, including your chapstick and anything that smells like food. And of course, they can chew through plastic or any other container. So you pretty much have to use glass to protect your things if you have mice around. Most people see mice in this posture running away when the lights come on or a drawer is open. They've got these big back legs, strong back legs to push off and run quickly. And this is what they look like in the snow. You can see the tail is dragging and the little teeny footprints. But you usually know you have mice if you open a drawer or a shed and you find a scene like this. And that means that you have a little invader, and they love to take shelter in the winter. So this is the time of year you will find them. One time I was leading a field trip in the greenhouse, and I looked down in a bucket and saw these two little baby mice. And I didn't dare tell the kids or we would have never gotten out of there. So I collected them along with a sibling that I found in another bucket. And I took it outside where hopefully they lived happily ever after in the forest, where the habitat we expect them to live in. Got to tell this cool story. I found my cat with his head underneath a piece of furniture, and I knew that there had to be a mouse in the house. And so we got under, we looked with flashlights, we lifted the furniture like this, trying to see what we could see. Had just about given up, but the cat hadn't, when I decided to use a flashlight and my cell phone to look between the wall and the furniture, and there was the mouse. And you can see it's got one leg on the wall and three on the furniture. And I kept thinking about how we were lifting that furniture and how, like an acrobat, it had been able to hang on. Poor guy. So I caught it and released it outside. So I told you that there might be other rodents that should be here, and we haven't seen them yet. The eastern wood rat is one of my favorite animals, in part because they love to decorate. If they find shiny tinsel or a wrapper or anything out in the wild, they will weave it into their nest. And I just think that's a really sweet characteristic. They are a native rat, and they should be here, so keep your eyes open as you travel around Florida parks. So these two, the house mouse on the left and the brown rat or Norway rat on the right, are actually not natives, and they unfortunately are the cause of some of the problems we have with disease that have happened throughout our history. But they were brought over on ships and released here accidentally, and so they are not native species, but they are here in Tennessee everywhere. One of the problems you can have with mice and rats is they will chew through anything, including wires. So people have had their cars not start. We actually have a friend who had her car not start for this reason. One thing I've found, at least in terms of a house, is peppermint oil. They don't like that smell. And so you can go and buy peppermint oil and sprinkle it around places that you're having issues, and that can help repel them. But rats are also pets, believe it or not. And I got this little rat that I named Arnie from a sixth grader who had too many pets. And so I ended up with this one. And this picture confirms they do like cheese. This is a mozzarella stick I'm offering him. And his personality and intelligence and warmth really, after Hunka Munka, the little mouse I'd had early on, just cemented my love of rodents. They are so intelligent. And this picture reminds me of the E.T. picture where E.T.'s hiding in the stuffed animals. I could have also used it for my opening. Which of these two is a rodent? Anyway, I recommend them as a pet. Okay, now, please type in the chat what you think this animal is, the name of the animal.
Okay, so we've got an animal on the left, and then on the right, we have what looks like a lot of leaves and sticks in the middle of water. Okay, so Ann is saying beaver, Kathy, Bert, beaver, Ann again, beaver, Melissa and Rebecca, beaver. Kim, can I tell them it's a trick question?
It was too late.
Okay, Kim, back to you.
That is not a beaver, and it was a trick question, and I knew that you might not identify that correctly, but look at that tail. Is that a beaver tail? It is easy to confuse this animal with a young beaver. It's much smaller than a beaver, but when they're swimming, they have the same color fur, they have the same habits and habitat, so it would be easy to confuse them. But look at that tail. It has been compressed, and there's a ridge along the top. That is characteristic of a muskrat tail. It's the only animal in Tennessee that has a tail that has a ridge like that. They will build those houses I showed you, but they also love to live along rivers. And if they live along a river, they might just build a burrow, and you'll see holes in the river bank that go to their homes. So these guys love to feed on aquatic plants, and I've seen them below the dam at Radnor. They're really fun to watch, but way smaller than a beaver. And here we are, a beaver. He's got a much bigger head, and but he's living in that same kind of habitat. We all know beavers, and I'm sure seen them in the wild, but I wanted to show you some fun facts about them. These guys are the rock stars of adaptations. They really are the king of adaptations. So here is Jed, one of our staff members, helping move our ambassador beaver, who is sadly a stuffed beaver that we use for programs. And this beaver is going to help us understand some of its adaptations. So now I'd love for you to put in the chat, what do you think the beaver uses this flat, hard, scaly tail for? What are some things you think they do with it?
Okay, so Ann says rudder. Rebecca says communication on the water, maybe like a Morse code. Anybody else have something to share? What does the beaver use its tail for? Melissa says warn against predators. So lots of good information. Bert says swimming, but nobody gave the wrong answer, which I gave the other day, did they, Kim?
I want you to give your wrong answer for us because I need to talk about it.
So the first time I watched Kim's presentation, I said that a beaver uses his tail to make his lodge. Thanks for embarrassing me.
Well, you can only blame the cartoons for that because the cartoons show that, but they do not use their tail like that. What they do use that tail, you've already answered very well. They swim with it. I love this picture. You can really see that tail is active and they're pushing up and down with it. This picture shows that they swim with those back feet, which we're going to get to, but they often just tuck their front feet up to their body. So it's really the back that's propelling them. Those who guess they warn, you're correct. They lift that tail up and then they splash the water. And it is to warn their young and their families of danger. It's also used to warn predators. It's kind of a statement, leave me alone, because usually once they slap the water, they dive and they move underwater. The incredible thing is a beaver can stay underwater 15 minutes. What lung capacity? Usually it's more like 5 or 6 minutes, but they can stay 15 if there's danger. So, of course, we know the beavers for this behavior right here that we'll talk about in just a minute. But look at this tail. It's kind of balancing. Sometimes they use it to balance as they work on a tree. And then sometimes it's just in the way, so they just sit on it. So let's look closer at some other features they have. The ear and the nose have flaps that keep water from getting in when they're underwater. Can you imagine how great it would be to swim without water in your ears and nose? And then the eyes have what you call a nictitating membrane, which is the fancy word for a clear eyelid that comes down so that they can see. It turns out vision is not their strong point. They don't really use their vision as much as they use their smell. They find their food by smell, and then they do have good hearing. So it's not about the vision. The feet are uniquely different. The left one is the front foot, and it's used for grasping. Even though they don't have a thumb, they can grasp with it. And then the right foot shows the back foot, which is webbed. Of course, they swim with this, and along with their tail that propels them through the water. They also have one of their toenails that has basically a file on it, and they can spread the oil that they emit, the castor oil that they exude, and they can do other things with it, clean themselves. So cool feet. And their teeth, think about those front incisors that just stick out way beyond the mouth. They can actually close their mouth. And their teeth, think about those front incisors that just stick out way beyond the mouth. They can actually close their mouth while holding something. So it's just incredible, their adaptations. This fur, up to 23,000 hairs per square centimeter. I don't even understand that statement, but this you're looking at guard hairs, which are thick, and they protect the soft fur underneath. And then underneath that is a big layer of blubber. So they are well suited for living in cold water. But here we are, back to the teeth and what makes this rodent so famous. These big orange teeth, the orange color actually is iron deposits in the tooth, and it's only in the front part. And that's why they end up with sort of a notched look. This helps them chew tremendously. If you're going to cut down a big tree like this, you need a strong tool, don't you? And this was found along the Little Harpeth River. This might take them a couple days to cut down, and this would take them just a matter of an hour, maybe minutes. They could do it pretty quickly. So what they really love to do when it comes to eating is they love to feed on twigs. They're eating that thin bark and then the cambium underneath. You know, the cambium is the living part of a tree, and it's directly beneath the bark. It includes the sap and all the goodness. So they just eat the top part. So they don't really eat the wood so much as they do that part. They love, once they fell a tree, they love to eat all the tender twigs and buds at the top. Here's a video by our own Heather Gallagher that I want you to listen to. The video is not that great, but the sound of them feeding is awesome. I think these guys should be called the pigs of the world, because they sound like they're kind of grunting and murmuring and pig-like. All right, thanks Heather for that. So, but of course we all know that they use sticks for other things. They like to build, they're builders. They're known as just having so much energy, industrious animals. And of course they're going to build a lodge. The lodge is very important for their safety and for raising their family. And this is a diagram of a lodge. And one of the coolest things is they figured out how to put in an underwater entrance. Imagine how much this is going to deter a coyote or some other predator after a beaver if you have to swim underwater and approach that way. So ingenious method of protecting themselves. And then you notice that at the very bottom, there's big stones. They actually made big stones to start their dwelling, and then they add sticks, and then they add mud. They'll get mud from the bottom, and we'll talk about that in a second too. And then of course they build dams, which makes them in conflict with many humans. So really beavers are amazing creatures that really affected the landscape of our country until we came along and started trapping them and moving them and messing with their behaviors. 2 years ago, this book came out, Eager Beavers Matter. And I highly recommend it. It's won all sorts of awards, but he argues that beavers can fight erosion, flooding, water scarcity, forest fires, climate change, dry stream beds, all sorts of things. decrease the water temperature, which is important for diversity in life, to have a cool water temperature. So all of these things beavers solve, and when we get them removed from our landscapes, then all of these problems happen. So we actually need to restore them to our communities. They're a keystone species, and that means all of these species rely on them. So from songbirds to waterfowl to reptiles and amphibians and fish and insects, every aquatic inhabitant relies on them. Think about the plants and the sedges and the marshes. All of these things are reliant on beavers for beautiful habitats like this that support a diversity of life. Not what we consider beautiful sometimes, but very important. So now that this realization is coming about, there's a huge coalition of people working to live with beavers. This is a baffle that's being put in so that in times of heavy rain, huge flooding will not occur where a beaver dam is. Some of the water will be allowed to move downstream, but it still maintains enough of a wetland for the beaver and its other animals to survive. So clever things, people realizing we need to live with these beautiful creatures. And I'm going to end with this slide from Mary Glenn Williamson, a photographer here in town. And she saw these two beavers that look like they're hugging. And I thought it was an appropriate way to end this on rodents, and just challenge and encourage you to look at rodents a different way and maybe see how we can live with them. What measures can we take that are humane and allow them to live their lives while we keep ourselves safe. So we're going to end with this question. If you learned something today that has changed your attitude toward rodents, whether it be an interesting behavior or an awareness that somehow we need to live with them, please share that in the chat. And thank you for joining today. I hope you now have a love of rodents. Okay.
It is almost 11 o'clock, so if you'd still like to share something in the chat about Kim's program, or something that you've learned new about rodents, please feel free to do so. In the meantime, I have to thank Kim Bailey, who today, she is the Lorax for the rodents. So thank you for speaking, Kim, on behalf of chipmunks and squirrels and all of the rodents that we love here in Warner Park.